and you guys are good to go. All loss will be at 4:40. Little flexible, but around 4:40. And please, good luck, everyone, and you have a good trial.
Your Honor, I believe you're muted.
Thank you. All right, let me call the case of Joey Petrillo versus Harper, Martini, and Peony Estates. Is counsel for the plaintiff ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor, we are.
Counsel for the defense, are you ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, do we have anything we need to take up before we start off with our opening statements?
Yes, Your Honor. Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff has a few pretrial matters.
All right, I'll hear from you.
Your Honor, since we are in a virtual environment, we would like to ask the court's permission to remain seated with our camera angles set through the remainder of trial today.
That's fine.
And we would like to make introductions before the court.
Please do.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Erica Daly, and I will be the plaintiff closing attorney in today's case.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Christian Mancino, and I will be the plaintiff opening attorney in today's case.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Hannah Trahan, and I will be the middle attorney for the plaintiff today.
Today, we have chosen to pursue a claim of negligence against Peony Estates, and we would like to direct Your Honor to the pretrial order.
All right.
First, we would like to note that all evidence pertaining to the battery claim is solely for use if battery is pursued, and we are not pursuing battery today.
Okay.
Second, we would like to note that Peony Estates is vicariously liable for all individual actions of their employees, including Harper Martini and Austin Lewis. And Your Honor, for the purposes of our Zoom trial today, may we assume that when evidence is shown to witnesses prior to entering evidence, that it is constructively viewed outside of the scope of the jury?
Yes.
And lastly, we would like to invoke Rules 603 and 615, the constructive swearing in and sequestration of all witnesses, barring party representatives.
All right. Any objection to sequestration by the defense?
Without objection, Your Honor.
All right, then both of those motions are allowed.
Thank you, Your Honor. The plaintiff is ready to proceed.
All right, anything from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. First, may we make appearances before the court?
Please do.
Good afternoon, Judge Pocock. My name is Cameron Metz, and today I'm joined by my two colleagues who will introduce themselves.
Good afternoon. My name is Catherine Lamerson.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Kayla Gronick.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Kayla Gronick.
Thank you. All right, anything else?
Yes, Your Honor. Just a couple pretrial matters. First,
Okay.
You plan on using a number of documents throughout trial. We would just like to ask if it's all right for us to use the screen share setting on Zoom in order to show those.
Sure.
Second, before trial, we discussed with plaintiff's counsel that if either of us have any interruptions, we're going to be as reasonable as possible for stopping time for statements, directs, and crosses.
Sure.
With
Who is
that,
responsible? You're keeping each other's time, right?
yes, Your Honor. And if either of us have any interruptions, we're going to be trying our best to make sure that we're stopping the time for those.
Right. Okay.
And if we do have any interruptions, just please let us know. And if that's with video or audio.
Right. Okay. Hopefully it'll go smoothly.
Yes, Your Honor. Next, we'd like to give notice to stipulation number 3, which states that exhibits 1 through 10 have already been stipulated to their authenticity and admissibility.
Okay.
And then last, we'd like to notice with Rule 615, we do have the defendant in court with us, but they will not be testifying.
Okay.
With that, Your Honor, we're ready to proceed.
All right. If there's nothing else, then the jury's with the plaintiff.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Please do.
May it please the court. Pesticides, profits, and a price. This is a case about a winery that valued profits above all else, including human life. You'll hear about a winery that tried to save money, but mishandled dangerous pesticides in the process. And it's this winery's pesticides that caused the death of a man on the night before his wedding. The winery was Peony Estates, and Genesis Petrillo paid the price. It was the night before his wedding, the rehearsal dinner. All of his friends and family were there, gathered to share a life-changing day. Genesis Petrillo sat next to his beloved fiancée, Casey Soto, and the soon-to-be family celebrated. The bride's mother, Harper Martini, gave a speech about the young couple's relationship, and she offered Genesis Petrillo a gift of a bottle of 2019 Cara wine. But this wasn't just any bottle. Not only was it the only 2019 Cara wine that existed, but it was made by Peony Estates, the same winery the wedding rehearsal was being held at. Peony Estates had grown the grapes and bottled the wine themselves. Throughout today's trial, pay attention to where this bottle was and listen to what happened to it. You'll hear that Genesis Petrillo drank this wine, but just a couple of hours later, something was wrong. Genesis Petrillo was really sick, his eyes watery, and he was vomiting. He gets rushed to the ER, and after a few more hours, Genesis Petrillo is dead. Wine and pesticides are found in his stomach. My name is Christian Mancino, representing the estate of Genesis Petrillo. And today, we've brought a negligence per se claim against the defendant, Peony Estates. And there's 4 factors in a negligence per se claim, which must be proven by a preponderance of the evidence, simply more likely than not. The first factor we'll prove is that Peony Estates violated Midland Section 12-100, the health code relating to pests and pesticides. Second, that this statute is a safety statute. The defense has already agreed to this factor. Third, we'll prove that Peony Estates caused a harm that same Midlands health code was intended to prevent. And what we'll prove is that harm was Genesis Petrillo getting poisoned by a bottle of 2019 Cara wine. And lastly, that simply Genesis was part of Midland Section 12-100's protected class. Again, the defense has already admitted to this factor prior to today's trial. At the conclusion of trial today, the judge will instruct you to determine if it's more likely than not that Peony Estates violated the health code statute and if their improper use of pesticides caused Genesis Petrillo's death. And today, you'll hear from 3 witnesses from the plaintiff. First, you'll hear from Casey Soto, Genesis Petrillo's fiancée. She'll tell you about her personal observations of Peony Estates' pesticide usage and how she was so concerned about someone being poisoned that she was even considering changing the wedding venue to a different location. Next, you'll hear from Riley Adkins O'Keefe, an FDA health inspector that went to Peony Estates multiple times and found numerous violations of Midland's code for dealing with pests and pesticides. She'll tell you exactly how Peony Estates violations could have led to pesticide being in Genesis Petrillo's wine. And lastly, you'll hear from Dr. Jim Kwan, the doctor who treated Genesis the night that he died. She'll tell you that wine and pesticides were found in Genesis Petrillo's stomach that evening, and that Dr. Jim Kwan will tell you how that pesticide in his stomach is the thing that killed Genesis Petrillo. At the conclusion of today's trial, once you've heard all the evidence, my co-counsel, Miss Erica Daly, will come before you and ask that you find the defendant, Peony Estates, liable for Genesis Petrillo's death, because Peony Estates misused their pesticides, valued profits above all else, and the price of that was Mr. Genesis Petrillo's life. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mariano. Is there an opening statement for the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Please do.
May it please the court, counsel, members of the jury. We just don't know. On June 7th, 2019, Genesis Petrillo was at his rehearsal dinner with his fiancee, Casey Soto, at Peony Estates, a winery and bed and breakfast right here in Midlands, owned by Harper Martini, Casey's mom. Genesis and Casey were supposed to get married the next day. But that night took a turn, and after an evening of drinking, Genesis Petrillo was admitted to River Valley Hospital in Midlands with symptoms of potential alcohol poisoning. Genesis was vomiting, was having trouble responding to questions, and exhibited the classic signs of alcohol poisoning. Unfortunately, as the night progressed, Genesis's symptoms got worse until he slipped into a coma and died. When tragedies like these happen, it's understandable to want answers. It's understandable to look for an explanation as to why someone died so suddenly and so tragically the night before their wedding. It's understandable to create a story in order to place the blame on someone or something. Opposing counsel did just that. They told you a story, gave you an explanation for what happened. A story that implicates Peony Estates as an irresponsible company with a wanton disregard for safety. Members of the jury, you'll learn today that that story just isn't true. It can't be, because there are still questions. And the answers to those questions, well, we just don't know. In Midlands, in order for Peony Estates to be found liable for negligence, the plaintiff must prove 4 elements to you. First, that the defendant violated a statute. Second, that the statute in question was a safety statute. Third, that the defendant's acts and or omissions caused the type of harm that the statute was intended to prevent. And fourth, that the plaintiff was a member of the statute's protected class. Members of the jury, the plaintiff will not be able to meet this burden for you today because there's too much information we just don't know. Today, you'll hear from a man named Danny Francazio. He's a winemaker from Midlands. He'll tell you all about his experience in the winemaking industry, and he'll tell you exactly how he told Harper Martini how to deal with the pest issues safely at her winery. Next, you'll hear from Dr. Richard Cannon, an expert toxicologist. Dr. Cannon will tell us that he can't conclusively say that Genesis Petrillo died from pesticide poisoning because there's a chance that Genesis died from alcohol poisoning instead. Dr. Cannon will tell us that because we just don't know Genesis Petrillo's peak blood alcohol content that night, well, there's a chance that Genesis died from alcohol poisoning. We'll also hear from Mr. Austin Lewis, the head winemaker at Peony Estates. Mr. Lewis will tell us all about the safety measures he personally implemented at Peony Estates, and will tell us exactly how he knows that pesticides could have never gotten in the wine. After you hear all that testimony, you may still have questions, and that's okay. There are a lot of questions in this case whose answers we just don't know. But I want you to focus on 3 important questions throughout the course of today's trial. Number 1, what was Genesis Petrillo's peak blood alcohol content? Number 2, when was the bottle of Cara wine contaminated with pesticides? And number 3, how, if at all, was the wine bottle contaminated with pesticides? Members of the jury, by the end of today's trial, I will know, as well as you do, that the answers to those questions are simple. We just don't know. And because we just don't know the answers to those 3 important questions, and because the plaintiff won't be able to answer those questions for you either, at the end of today's trial, my co-counsel, Ms. Gronick, will come before you and ask you to find Peony Estates not liable for negligence. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. All right. The plaintiff like to call their first witness, please.
Yes, Your Honor. We call Casey Soto to the stand.
Okay. Ms. Soto, you understand you are under oath?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Counselor, you may proceed.
Can you introduce yourself for the court?
My name is Casey Soto.
Now, Ms. Soto, I know that this is difficult, but can you tell the court why you're here today?
Well, my mother is Harper Martini, who owns Peony Estates, and Genesis was my fiance before he died.
Now, before we talk about Peony Estates, let's talk about your late fiance. How did you and Mr. Petrillo meet?
Well, we met at a party at Rosie and Pedre Winery in 2012 and officially started dating a month later, and were inseparable ever since. Genesis was always the life of the party. He got along with everyone except for Harper.
And how long were you together before you got engaged?
3 years.
Did Genesis have any health problems?
No. Genesis was the picture of health. He was the most active person that I knew. He always,
Lack of foundation.
Overruled.
Ms. Soto, would you like me to repeat the question?
yes, please.
Did Genesis have any health problems?
No, he didn't. Like I was saying, he had always had to be up at 8 a.m. on the weekends for some big activity. He especially loved hiking. I was never really a morning person, but I honestly would give anything to just go on another hike with him.
And when did you get engaged?
July of 2018.
What happened after your engagement?
Well, we immediately started planning our wedding at Rosie and Pedre Winery, since that's really where our love story began. We met through mutual friends at a wine party there years ago, and we just started planning up until Harper found out.
And why did Mrs. Martini get involved?
Well, she always wanted to have my wedding at Peony Estates. Harper said it would be good publicity for the business and that it was needed. I wasn't really keen on having the wedding at Peony, but it just seemed a better idea financially, I guess. I mean, the winery was part of.
Objection, hearsay to the statements of Harper Martini.
All right, let's assume we're outside the presence of the jury. Plaintiff's counsel, what do you have to say about the objection?
Your Honor, Harper Martini is an employee of is the owner and employee of Peony Estates. Therefore, Harper Martini is the party opponent, and this is not hearsay.
All right, defense counsel, what do you say?
Yes, Your Honor. That vicarious liability order is set to a specific period of time. We've not heard when this statement by Harper Martini was made. And furthermore, it's not relevant to the claim of negligence for which that vicarious liability order is to be applied. And therefore, it doesn't fall under that order and is hearsay.
All right, overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Soto, why did Mrs. Martini get involved?
Well, Harper always wanted to have my wedding at Peony Estates. She really said she needed the good publicity for the business, and I wasn't really keen on it all, but it just seemed like a good idea financially.
And why did Peony Estates need business?
Well, Harper said something about a massive leak in a storage barn, and that the only options were to spend money repairing the damage or move everything from the storage barn, since it was the only place large enough to store everything.
What was in the storage barn that had to be moved?
Landscaping tools, pesticides, cleaning supplies, that type of stuff.
And what did Mrs. Martini do when this leak occurred?
Harper said they would start relocating things and then moving them back once Peony Estates made enough profit to warrant the expensive repairs. I mean, I don't really know if Peony Estates ever raised enough money to actually make those repairs, but seeing how much Harper wanted the wedding at Peony Estates, I promised to at least mention the offer to Genesis.
Was there anything that happened at Peony Estates that made you concerned for the wedding?
Well, I read a memo that Austin sent to the employees at Peony Estates.
Who is Austin?
Austin was the head winemaker guy at Peony.
Now, would you recognize this memo if I showed it to you?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, permission to screen share Exhibit 12, the memo.
All right.
Okay. Can you see the memo?
Yes.
Okay. Now, Ms. Soto, what is this?
That's the memo from Austin Lewis.
Does it appear to be a fair and accurate copy?
Yes, it is.
At this time, Your Honor, we would like to exhibit this memo in as Exhibit 12.
Any objection?
Pursuant to your previous ruling on the vicarious liability order, no objection, Your Honor.
And Ms. Soto, what is this memo about?
The memo was talking about some type of infestation that they needed to quickly spray pesticide for so they wouldn't lose any more profit and that nothing else mattered.
Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing now. Now, were there any other doubts that you had about the wedding?
Yeah, at one point, Harper told me about a bad inspection and that she was really worried about it. Harper kept reassuring me that my wedding would still happen and there shouldn't be any problems, but Peony Estates apparently needed to change how their pesticide was stored. She just made it sound so dangerous and unsafe that I seriously considered moving the wedding date just to make sure nobody got hurt. And honestly, I just really wish I had.
And why didn't you move the date of the wedding?
During our conversation, Harper wouldn't tell me why there was a problem, but reassured me that most of the things that needed to be fixed were just formalities. But looking back, I just wish that I would have gone with my first instinct and moved the wedding, and maybe none of this would have happened and Genesis was—
Objection to relevance.
What do you say, plaintiff's counsel?
Ms. Soto is stating why she would have liked to move the wedding because she had doubts about Peony Estates cleanliness, which is the charge today.
May I respond?
Okay.
Your Honor, the witness is right now describing her wishes after the fact for having held a wedding elsewhere. You know, that's not relevant to the claim today of negligence. What is relevant are her observations and knowledge from before that wedding, from before the alleged poisoning.
Sustained.
Motion to strike.
Allowed.
Ms. Soto, I'm really sorry to have to ask you this, but do you know how Genesis died?
Yeah, the doctor said that he died of poisoning and it was most likely pesticides.
Now, what was your first thought? I think there was an objection.
I apologize if my microphone wasn't working. My objection was to hearsay to the doctor's statements, Your Honor.
What do you say to that, plaintiff's counsel?
The statements by the doctor were made about a medical diagnosis of Genesis Petrillo, and also it goes towards the effect on Ms. Soto.
May I respond?
Well, hang on a second. Are you offering it for the truth of the matter asserted?
No, Your Honor, just the effect on Ms. Soto.
You're not offering the statement to prove that he died as a result of pesticide?
No, Your Honor.
All right, what do you say to that defense?
Your Honor, if counsel is not offering this statement for the truth, then I ask that the statement itself be stricken from the record and the witness only testify as to her actions after she spoke with the doctors.
Plaintiff's counsel, what effect on the listener is the witness going to testify to?
The witness is going to testify about what she thought once she heard, she's going to testify as to what she thought after she heard what the doctor had to say.
And how is that relevant?
It goes towards the cleanliness and just business practices of Peony Estates that led to today.
I'm going to sustain the objection.
Motion to strike the doctor's statement.
Wow.
Now, Ms. Soto, what happened? What did you do once you found out that Genesis had died?
I kept thinking about Genesis, and I don't know why, but in the back of my mind, I just couldn't get it out of my head that I kept thinking about Peony Estates.
Thank you, Ms. Soto. No further questions.
All right, cross-examine.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Ms. Soto. Can you see and hear me all right?
Yes, I can.
I understand this topic may be difficult for you, but I do have some more questions about that wedding rehearsal. We can agree that that rehearsal dinner was scheduled on June 7th, 2019, right?
Yes, it was.
And it was held at Peony Estates.
Yes.
Ma'am, to the best of your knowledge, at that rehearsal dinner, you and Mr. Petrillo ate and drank the same things.
Yeah, we ate and drank everything except for the bottle of wine. That's the one thing that I didn't drink that he did.
Let's talk about that bottle of wine. You saw it at one point in the night. Miss Martini presented that bottle to Mr. Petrillo.
Yes.
And you watched Mr. Petrillo take that bottle back to your table.
Yes.
And it's true that there were multiple wedding guests besides yourself and Mr. Petrillo at that table, right?
Not to my knowledge.
Ma'am, wouldn't you agree with me that you saw Mr. Petrillo pour 2 separate glasses of that wine?
Yes, I do recall that.
And the second glass wasn't for you, right?
No, I don't know who it was for.
Well, that's right. Of all the people in that wedding party around him, you don't know who that second glass of wine from that bottle was for.
All I know is that Angel took a sip and spit it out, but I don't know who the second glass was for.
You don't know if anyone else who was at that rehearsal dinner drank from that bottle of wine, do you?
No, just apart from Angel, no, I don't.
And you don't know much else about that night, do you?
No, I went to bed a little earlier.
Well, that's right. You actually went to bed before Mr. Petrillo did, right?
That's right. And I can't believe that I did. If only I had stayed up, maybe I could have prevented some of this from happening.
Ma'am, because you went to bed before Mr. Petrillo, you just don't know how much he had to drink that night, do you?
No, I don't.
If anything that he ate or drank that night had been contaminated by pesticides, you just don't know when that happened, do you?
No, but like I said, we ate and drank the same things that day for dinner. So I don't know of anything else that he would have eaten except for the wine.
To clarify, ma'am, if anything had been contaminated, you don't know when that happened, right?
No, I wouldn't know.
If anything he ate or drank had been contaminated, you don't know how it was contaminated by pesticides.
I don't know for sure, no.
Thank you, ma'am. Your Honor, I have nothing further.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor, no redirect.
Okay. And the witness step down. Thank you, Ms. Soto. Plaintiff, want to call your next witness?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff calls Riley Adkins O'Keefe to the stand.
Ms. O'Keefe, please, or Mr. O'Keefe, whichever the case may be, please come forward and assume you've been sworn.
I have.
There she is. Okay,
Sorry about that.
no problem. Go ahead and proceed, counsel.
Please introduce yourself to the jury.
Hello, I'm Riley Adkins O'Keefe.
And why are you in court today?
Well, I'm actually not in court today, and thank God for that. Courtrooms are riddled with germs. I mean, imagine the contaminants. But I am testifying over Zoom today because I have visited Peony Estates 3 times as an FDA health inspector.
What education does it take to become a health inspector?
I earned my master's in viticulture, the study of grapevines, and enology, the study of wines, from Midlands U in 2012.
And what did you do with your education?
In 2013, I combined my love of wine and cleanliness by working as a health inspector for wineries. I was even promoted to senior health inspector in 2017.
What do you do as a senior health inspector?
As senior health inspector, I identify health and safety violations and make sure that wineries resolve them. If businesses violate health standards, it can cause people to get sick or even die. As an official designee for the FDA, it is no understatement to say that I can save lives.
Well, how do you know what safety precautions are necessary?
I don't make the rules, that's above my pay grade. I just ensure that they're being followed. I look at the Midlands Building Code to know what is necessary to keep people safe.
And what kinds of things do you enforce from the Midlands Building Code?
It has all regulations that people are used to seeing in restaurants. For example, the employees must wash hands sign in the bathroom. That's the code, and I enforce it.
Well, what does the Midlands Building Code mention about pesticide usage in wineries specifically?
Well, pesticides are only allowed in wineries if proper safety precautions are put in place to make sure pesticides don't contaminate any food or wine and make people sick.
I'd like to talk about your visit to Peony Estates in 2018. Why did you visit Peony Estates?
In 2018, my department received a letter claiming Peony Estates had a problem with a bug infestation in their cellar and that the pesticides being used might be getting into the wine. I was assigned to investigate this claim per protocol.
And what did you find out on your visit?
Bugs everywhere, all over the floor, all over the wine barrels. It was disgusting. Based on my training and experience, the pests had been present for around 4 to 8 weeks.
Would these bugs have affected the wine in the nearby barrels?
The bugs themselves could not affect the wine inside the barrels, but Peony Estates pesticides could have poisoned the wine.
Well, what did you do once you found out about Peony Estates' use of pesticides?
I ran a toxicology report from a sample of wine inside the barrels to check if pesticides were present.
Why did you run a toxicology report?
Well, the wine in these barrels were going to be bottled and sold in 2019. If there were unsafe amounts of pesticides just sitting in the barrels, it would not be safe to drink.
What did the toxicology report reveal?
It showed a high level of isofenfus, which is a chemical commonly found in pest control tools, such as bug-off pesticides.
What does there mean to be a high level of isofenfus?
A high level of isofenfus just means that there is a high concentration of a pesticide chemical in the wine. A high level of pesticides in someone's drink can be extremely dangerous because drinking pesticides can be deadly.
I'd like to talk about the next time you investigated Peony Estates. When did you next visit the winery?
During May 2019, I visited Peony Estates for a follow-up inspection.
And what did you find then?
Peony Estates had 4 health code violations, 3 of which were related to pesticides.
What was the first health code relating to pesticides at Peony Estates that they violated?
Well, first, there were 3 pesticide containers in the bottling facilities that were too close to open wine bottles.
And why does this violate health code?
Peony Estates was not taking steps to prevent cross-contamination. Midlands Code requires this as pesticide containers can leak out harmful chemicals like isofenfus, which could get into the wine and severely harm anyone who ingests it.
Would you please explain Peony Estates' next health code violation?
Upon speaking to the staff, I found that none of them knew the importance of keeping pesticides away from wine processing areas.
How would an uninformed staff violate?
Objection, Your Honor, may be heard.
All right.
There's a speculation for this witness to say that those staff members specifically did not know about the pesticide usage at Peony Estates and their proper practice. This would require her to know the state of mind of those people.
All right. I think I'll let you cross-examine on that, but for the time being, overruled.
How would an uninformed staff violate health code?
A staff that doesn't understand how unsafe it is to have pesticides around open wine containers will store pesticides closer to the wine.
And what was the final health code violation you observed at Peony Estates?
A bottle of 2019 Caro wine was stored very close to a bottle of pesticides.
Where was the wine bottle?
It was sitting on a wooden shelf in the bottling area.
And where was the container of pesticides?
The pesticides were sitting on top of that same wooden shelf right next to the wine bottle.
Was there anything in between the wine bottle and the container of pesticides?
No, there wasn't any sort of barrier or anything to protect the wine from getting contaminated. The bottle of wine and the pesticide can were sitting all by themselves right near each other.
And why was this a health code violation?
Well, it's possible that pesticide chemicals got into this 2019 bottle of Caro wine. Because of this, I told employees to discard the bottle because the wine could be contaminated.
Are you aware if Peony Estates followed your requirement to discard the 2019 Caro wine bottle?
They did not move it in front of me. So at this time, I have no way to verify whether or not they actually moved the bottle after my visit.
What other actions did you take after finding these health code violations?
I placed Peony Estates on a 45-day probationary period with the intent to return for a surprise inspection in mid-June.
Why didn't you take any more serious actions against Peony Estates?
There wasn't really anything else I could do. I followed procedure and made immediate recommendations, like discarding the bottle of Caro wine. These situations are difficult because as a health inspector, I can only make recommendations to prevent safety hazards. I can't force them to change anything unless they refuse to comply with my recommendations.
Were there any other reports indicating high isophenphis levels in Peony Estates wine?
Yes, the toxicology report from a 2019 bottle of Caro wine that the Rapid River Police Department forwarded to my office.
Your Honor, permission to screen share what has already been pre-admitted in evidence as Exhibit 10.
All right.
Can you please tell the jury what you see on your screen?
Yes, this is the tox report for June 9th, 2019, indicating those high levels of isophenphis.
Where was this pesticide found?
According to this report, this sample was collected from inside the bottle of 2019 Caro wine. This is the same type of wine I told them to dispose of.
And how do these isophenphis levels compare to the FDA maximum limit?
These levels are exceeding the amount permitted by the FDA.
Were you able to make a conclusion regarding the presence of health code violations during the production of the 2019 cycle of wine?
Yes, I was.
And what was your conclusion?
Based on my professional education, training, and experience, there were 4 health code violations and several health hazards pertaining to improper pesticide use and drainage during the time the 2019 Caro bottle of wine was being produced at Peony Estates.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions at this time.
All right, cross-examination,
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
please.
Good afternoon, Ms. Atkins.
Good afternoon.
Are you able to see and hear me all right?
I am, thank you.
Now, Ms. O'Keefe, you would agree with me that FDA standards are very important.
I would, yes.
You've been inspecting Peony Estates for the past 5 years.
I have, yes.
You've completed 3 reports after your investigations.
Yes, sir.
And ma'am, just a few moments ago, you told us on direct you found pesticides in the Peony Estates wine.
I found it near the wine, not in the wine.
So ma'am, to be clear, in all those times, You've never found pesticides inside the wine.
I have not found pesticides inside the wine outside of my 2018 inspection, in which there were high levels of isofenfus in the barrels.
That did not violate FDA standards, did it?
No, sir, it did not.
That did not cause you to shut down the Peony Estates winery.
It did not, although my their 4 health code violations in 2019 did result in a 45-day probationary period.
Ma'am, we'll talk about those in a moment, but just to answer my question, you never had to shut down Peony Estates due to FDA violations with pesticides.
No, I have not.
So let's talk about the violations you did find, all right? Now, on direct, there was only one visit where you found violations.
Yes.
That was in 2019.
Yes.
But the one time you found the violation, it wasn't because there were pesticides in the wine.
No.
Ma'am, during that visit, you had found pesticide containers being kept in the wrong area.
Yes, very close to the wine, close enough that I would feel comfortable discarding the bottles that were too close.
You did not shut down the winery after that visit.
I did not. I put them on a 45-day probationary period to give them the opportunity to rectify those violations before we moved to shutting down the winery.
So that's a yes. You gave them probation.
Yes.
You gave them your recommendations.
Yes.
And the winery was allowed to stay open.
For the time being, yes.
Thank you, ma'am. No further questions at this time.
And redirect.
No redirect based on that, Your Honor. May the witness be excused?
She may. Thank you, Ms. O'Keefe. Any further witnesses for the plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Dr. Jim Kwan to the stand.
All right, Dr. Kwan, please come forward and assume that you have been sworn.
Yes, Your Honor.
May we proceed?
Please.
Please introduce yourself to the jury.
Hello, my name is Dr. Jim Kwan, and I am a first responder in the ER.
What do you do in the ER?
Currently, I am the chief of emergency physician at River Valley Hospital in Midlands. Normally, I have emergency patients come in and require immediate care and attention, regardless of their medical condition.
Dr. Kwan, can you tell us a little bit about your medical background?
I received my bachelor's of science at Georgia Tech. I then went to med school at UNC Chapel Hill, and finally, I completed my residency at Emory's Department of Emergency Medicine and Medical Toxicology.
Why are you here today?
I'm here to give expert testimony on the death of Mr. Genesis Petrillo.
And how did you begin your analysis?
I began my analysis by examining the following materials: the affidavit of Angel Rodriguez, the toxicology and laboratory testing reports, the death certificate, an analytical report of Petrillo's wine bottle, and finally, the alcohol impairment chart.
What method did you use in your analysis today?
I conducted a full examination of the defendant in the emergency room and analyzed his symptoms and gave a diagnosis.
And did you reliably apply those methods for today's case?
Yes, I did.
Dr. Kwan, what does a typical examination entail?
Normally, a patient comes into the ER. It's a very fast-paced and quick environment. Therefore, I check for initial symptoms and see what those relate to. I then make a diagnosis and attempt to treat the patient.
Dr. Kwan, let's discuss the examination of the defendant. What was Mr. Petrillo like when he first came into the ER?
When Mr. Petrillo first came to the ER, he was very sick and showed signs of vomiting and watery eyes as well.
What time did he come in?
He came in to the ER at around 1 a.m. with his friend Angel Rodriguez.
And what were your initial thoughts when you saw him?
Well, upon entering the ER room, I examined Mr. Petrillo. I took note of his vitals, his symptoms, and took samples of his vomit. At that point, he was vomiting occasionally and was not able to support himself. He also experienced muscle twitches and struggled to breathe, and I heard wheezing as I told him to take deep breaths. I attempted to speak to Mr. Petrillo, however, he was having trouble responding due to his symptoms. At that point, I suspected he could have alcohol poisoning, but then I did notice some symptoms that did not align with alcohol poisoning.
Dr. Kwan, what symptoms did not align with alcohol poisoning?
So I noticed Mr. Petrillo's pupils were constricted rather than dilated, which is not normal for alcohol poisoning. His eyes were tearing excessively and his heart rate was at a slow pace rather than weak and rapid, along with muscle spasms, which led me to test for other toxins in his system.
After seeing these symptoms, Dr. Kwan, what did you do?
Well, since I'd examined his eyes and noted other different symptoms not consistent with alcohol poisoning, I decided to run a toxicology test because there was a chance Mr. Petrillo was exposed to pesticide poisoning.
Dr. Kwan, before we get into that test, can you tell the jury how someone can be poisoned by a pesticide?
So there are 3 ways someone can receive pesticide poisoning: by organic phosphates or isophonous pesticide. It can be physical contact, inhalation, and ingestion. The typical symptoms for each is breaking out in rashes, respiratory complications, and nervous system breakdown, respectively. There were no rashes or respiratory symptoms related to pesticide symptoms, leaving me with the only alternative of ingestion.
Dr. Kwan, what were the results of the toxicology screen you ran?
After the testing results, I found Genesis Petrillo had ingested organophosphate poison, which is typically used in insecticide, which was found in the contents of his stomach.
Dr. Kwan, this is very important. How did a pesticide enter Genesis Petrillo's system?
Since there were no rashes or respiratory symptoms present in Mr. Petrillo, and because the only pesticide found in Mr. Petrillo was in his stomach, the pesticide was ingested, not inhaled or transmitted through skin contact.
Dr. Kwan, what is your final conclusion in today's case?
By the end of all testing, I concluded that the only way Genesis Petrillo could have ingested the organophosphate pesticide poison was through the Cara wine he was given and consumed on June 7th.
Thank you, Dr. Kwan. Your Honor, I have no further questions at this time.
Okay, cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Please do.
You specialize in toxicology, right?
Could you repeat that? I couldn't hear you.
You specialize in toxicology, correct?
Yes.
Can you hear me all right now? Let me know if at any point you can't hear me. At your hospital, you're usually given suspected poison, correct?
Counsel, we are having a difficult time hearing you.
Just one moment.
You're kind of going in and out.
Is it better now?
Yes, much better. Thank you.
My AirPods have been giving me some trouble lately.
Right,
May I proceed?
please.
Doctor, you specialize in toxicology.
Yes, that's correct.
At your hospital, you're usually given suspected poisoning cases.
Yes.
Genesis Petrillo came into your emergency department on June 8th, 2019.
Yes, he did.
He had a number of different symptoms, right?
Yes,
He was vomiting.
correct.
He was having trouble walking.
Yes,
He was having trouble responding to your questions.
also correct.
You noticed that he smelled like wine.
Yes, I did.
These are all signs that someone's suffering from alcohol poisoning, right?
Yes,
In fact, doctor, you originally suspected that Genesis Petrillo was suffering from alcohol poisoning.
yes, initially, until I found some other symptoms that did not quite fit the description.
So doctor, you admitted Genesis to the emergency room, right?
Yes,
And you ran a couple tests.
yes, I did.
One of those tests was a toxicology report on Genesis Petrillo's blood, right?
I did not take specific blood samples for testing. However, I did take analysis of his stomach content.
Dr. Kwan, is it your testimony today that you did not run a blood test on Genesis Petrillo in the hospital?
I did not run a blood test.
Your Honor, just one moment. Now, Dr. Kwan, you remember writing a report for today's case.
Yes,
You'd recognize that report if I showed it to you.
yes.
Just one moment. Your Honor, permission to screen share the expert's report.
Sure.
Dr. Kwan, this is that report.
Yes,
I'm going to scroll down to the bottom. This is your signature, correct?
Yes.
It's the same report that you submitted before you were called to testify today.
Yes.
Now, please read along silently as I read aloud. Line 123. While I was still waiting on testing at this point, I had several reasons to believe that this was a case of organophosphate pesticide poisoning. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
Now I'm going to jump to line 138. Petrio's blood alcohol content of 0.16 is notable in this case. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Kwan, would you recognize the results of the toxicology report you ran on Genesis Petrio?
Yes.
I'm going to have my co-counsel, Mr. Metz, screen share that. Let me know when you can see it. Now, doctor, we agree that this is the results of the blood test taken at 3 a.m., correct?
Yes.
It says a specimen here is blood,
Yes.
and the time drawn was 2:58 a.m. on June 8th, 2019.
Correct.
Doctor, we agree that this report tells us that Genesis Petrio's BAC at 3 a.m. was 0.16, correct?
Yes. I had taken this test to see whether or not there was presence of pesticide.
Thank you, Mr. Metz. You can go ahead and take that document down. Now, Dr. Kwan, we can agree that the last time Genesis Petrio could have been drinking was 12:42 a.m., right?
Yes.
911 was called at 12:42 a.m.
Yes.
Now, doctor, you'd agree with me that we just don't know if 0.16 was Genesis Petrio's peak blood alcohol content that night.
Yes, that's correct.
Doctor, it's possible that if Genesis Petrio's BAC were higher when he first came into the hospital, well, that could have impacted the severity of his symptoms.
Yes, however, it does take a certain amount to consider something for alcohol poisoning because the number was quite low and because there's a very slow and gradual decrease. Alcohol poisoning wouldn't be a significant cause for his death.
You know that in cases where someone's BAC was at least 0.25, it could be fatal, correct?
Correct.
Well, Dr. Kwan, you weren't at the rehearsal dinner that night.
I was not there.
You don't know how pesticides could have gotten into anything Genesis Petrio ate or drank that night, do you?
No, I do not.
And Dr. Kwan, you have no knowledge on how pesticides got in that Cara bottle of wine.
No.
Thank you. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
Briefly, Your Honor. Dr. Kwan, why did you rule out alcohol poisoning?
As I did notice, Genesis Petrillo's blood alcohol content was at 1.6. However, prior to and when he did stop drinking, blood alcohol content levels drop 0.015 every hour after the drinking stops. Therefore, the peak level of his blood content would not be high enough to consider for alcohol poisoning.
Objection, Your Honor.
All right. On what ground?
Pardon me?
What's your objection?
The hearsay, sorry. To the statements
Okay.
of the document or the formula that the doctor is referring to.
Your Honor, if I may respond.
All right.
Dr. Kwan is a medical doctor. She has plenty of experience dealing with these issues. This is common knowledge for someone with her background to know. She doesn't have to rely on any specific forms, and she's not citing any forms. She's citing her knowledge and experience as an emergency medical doctor.
Okay, overruled.
Dr. Kwan, are you ready to continue?
Yes.
Dr. Kwan, would it have been possible for Genesis Petrillo's blood alcohol content to be a lethal level?
In this case, no, because as we did see, when we tested for his level, it was at 1.6. And for it to be considered at a lethal level, it must be much higher.
Thank you, Dr. Kwan. Your Honor, I have no further questions.
Thank you very much. All right, Dr. Kwan, you may step down.
Your Honor, one moment, please. May I be permitted to do a recross?
Okay, it'd have to be limited to what was in redirect.
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Kwan, you remember writing a report for today's case?
Yes.
You recognize the report if I showed it to you?
Yes.
I'm going to screen share that report again. Dr. Kwan, you just testified to a formula that you used to assess Genesis Petrio's peak BAC, correct?
Yes.
I'm going to give you a moment to look through this document. And I'd like you to point to me to the line number where you list that formula. Let me know when you find it.
I had rather actually based this formula off my knowledge and my experience as a medical professional.
So to be clear, Dr. Kwan, that formula is not in this report.
It is not found in this report.
The first time we're hearing about that formula is today in court.
Yes, because in medicine, this is regarded as common knowledge.
Thank you, doctor. I have nothing further.
Okay, all right. I'm gonna let the witness step down now. Thank you, Dr. Kwan.
Thank you.
Any further evidence from the plaintiff?
No further evidence, Your Honor.
Okay. Are there any motions for the defense?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Do you guys need a little break? Are you ready to go on?
Your Honor, the plaintiff rests and requests a brief 5-minute break.
Right.
That works for us as well.
Okay, 5 minutes is fine. It's 3:06. We'll be back here at 3:11.
Whenever you're ready, Your Honor, defense is back and ready to proceed.
Thank you.
The plaintiff is also ready to proceed, Your Honor.
Okay, well, no time like the present. The defense would like to call their first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Danny Francasio.
Mr. Francasio, please come forward and assume that you've been informed.
May I proceed?
Please do.
Good afternoon. Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Hello, my name's Danny Francasio.
Where are you from, Mr. Francasio?
Originally, Brooklyn, but for the past 15 years of my life, and the best 15 years of my life, right here in Rapid River Valley, Midlands. I own and operate my own winery, Rosie and Pedro's. And listen, no virus is gonna stop us. Rosie and Pedro's is still open for business. We got the big grape sign out front off Highway 1. You can't miss us.
What brought you to Midlands?
Well, I've always wanted to make wine. My grandparents, they're from Sicily. They owned a winery, and I swear the stuff they produced was like nectar from the gods. Listen, Napa, I could have never afforded, but I found the perfect spot in Midlands, and I saw it as my chance to carry out the family tradition, so here I am.
As the owner and operator of a local winery, tell us about your responsibilities.
Sheesh. I need a glass of Pinot just thinking about it, honestly. I oversee the entire operation, from grape to bottle, between overseeing vineyards, facilities, working with the viticulture experts and engineers, discussing business with our distributors and clients. I spend most of my time at the winery. Not that my wife would ever believe me, though.
Are you familiar with Peony Estates?
Of course. It's just some local competition. Rosie and Pedro's was here first, mind you, and we don't sell any of that cheap boxed garbage that Harper churns out.
You said Harper. Is that Harper Martini?
Yeah, Harper Martini.
How do you know Mr. Martini?
Martini, he was an old employee of mine. He got it in his head that he had what it took to start a winery.
When did he work for you?
I would say it was 2012 to early 2015. He was just a cellar hand, but two of my employees left, so I promoted him to vineyard manager.
In either of those capacities, when he worked for you, did Mr. Martini handle pesticides?
Oh yeah, all the time.
Are you aware of any risks associated with the use of pesticides?
Well, the stuff's poisonous. That's why the FDA and the Department of Health, they really regulate the hell out of it.
So are there any industry best practices that you have to follow to keep your customers and employees safe?
Of course, like I said, lots of regulation. You got to keep your pesticides at separate storage sites, at least 50 feet away from your winery. When you're spraying stuff outside, the sanitation protocol for keeping your vineyard staff safe. And if you're using pesticides indoors, you got to seal up everything, all your casks, and move everything out you can before you spray.
Sir, you mentioned sealing casks of wine before spraying indoors. If an individual sealed bottle of wine were in an indoor facility that had been sprayed with pesticides, to your knowledge, is it safe to assume the wine inside that sealed bottle is contaminated?
No, not if it's sealed. You just need to wipe it down.
Objection to this speculation.
May I respond?
Please.
Your Honor, speculation calls for a witness to enter the mindset of another individual. There's no individual that Mr. Francasio is entering the mindset of. Rather, he's testifying to his knowledge based on his experience and training in the winery industry.
I'm sorry, Your Honor. I meant to say improper expert testimony. May I be heard?
Okay.
Mr. Francasio has not talked about any education or any methods or anything that goes towards him being able to know whether wine in a bottle is safe to be consumed if it's near pesticides. And I believe he said that it's okay if you just wipe it down.
May I respond?
Okay.
Your Honor, the prongs of Rule 703, which opposing counsel is referencing, need only be met if a witness is offering an expert conclusion. Mr. Francasio is not offering an expert conclusion. He's telling us about his knowledge in his field, what his experience is. We've already heard about how long he's been in the field. We heard that he owns and operates this winery. And he's telling us that based on his knowledge of pesticides and use of them, this is how they work. There's no expert conclusion being drawn here. And so we need not lay any further expert foundation.
Okay, sustained.
Mr. Francasio, during the period that Mr. Martini worked for you, was he ever responsible for performing these industry best practices?
Yeah, of course.
During that time that he performed these best practices handling pesticide, was your winery ever cited with a health code violation for pesticide mismanagement?
Absolutely not.
During that time he was performing those best practices, did you become aware of any of your winery's customers becoming sick with pesticide poisoning?
Never. Definitely never.
Have you been in contact with Mr. Martini since he left your employ?
Well, not really too much. He's emailed me a couple of times about his kid Casey's wedding. And he
Objection,
also-
hearsay.
May I respond?
All right.
Your Honor, there's been no statement elicited. Mr. Francasio merely said he received an email.
He was about to say he said. So sustained is the statement.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Francasio, without giving us a specific statement, can you tell us what those emails were about?
They were about his kid Casey's wedding, and he was asking me for his advice.
Well, tell us about the time that he asked for your advice.
Well, get this. Back in 2019, Peony Estates, they finally failed an FDA inspection. He asked for my advice about how to fix the issues that the inspector had pointed out. And look, Harper and I aren't exactly family, but Casey, this kid Casey, she's a good kid. And I was really, really torn about helping a competitor out. So I went to my priest, talked to him about this dilemma. He told me I ought to help the guy out, and so I did.
So how did you respond to that email asking for advice?
Well, I recommended a specific brand of drain cleaner, organic. I told him keep his pesticides away from the storage area and to just follow the industry's best practices like he did at Rosie and Pedro's, and he would be all right.
You also mentioned an email about Casey Soto's wedding. Sir, do you know how much Genesis Petrillo had to drink the night before that wedding?
Objection, speculation.
May I respond?
All right.
Your Honor, again, I'm not asking Mr. Francasio to enter the mindset of another person. I'm asking for his personal knowledge.
And answer the question if he knows.
Yes, Your Honor. So, Mr. Francasio, do you know how much Mr. Petrillo had to drink that night?
I've got no idea. I was not at that wedding rehearsal.
Do you know how anything he had to drink that night may have been contaminated by pesticides?
If that happens, I do not know.
If that happened, do you know when it may have been contaminated by pesticides?
Again, I don't know anything about that. I wasn't there.
Do you know if Peony Estates was ever shut down by the FDA?
I do know, and no, it never was. I mean, that would have been nice. But apparently they didn't fail that health inspection that badly. I would have definitely heard about it if they did.
Sir, why do you say you would have definitely heard about that?
Well, you know, I keep my eye on them. I'm not one to pass up on an opportunity to rid myself of a little aforementioned competition. You know, at one point I even suggested an investigative journalist I know to look into Peony Estates. I had to look out after the community, you know?
After you got a journalist to look into Peony Estates, what happened?
Well, she never published a story or nothing, and she never told me that she found nothing either. And the FDA, they never shut Peony Estates down.
Thank you, sir. I have nothing further.
Cross-examination,
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
please.
Mr. Francasio, Miss Martini used to work as your cellar hand, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
And as your seller hand, Mrs. Martini was in charge of looking around the area and making sure it was free and clear of pests.
Yes, she was in charge of that.
You would say she did a pretty okay time at her job.
She did a really good job. I was very impressed by the work that man put in.
And she had to notify you if she saw any pests in the area.
Yeah, he did.
And you would say that exposing the wine to pesticides is worse than exposing it to pests.
Well, sheesh, if you expose a whole cask of wine to some pesticides, you got to throw the whole thing away. I mean, that's a lot of lost money, a lot of lost profit.
Now, when Mrs. Martini worked for you, you did a pesticide cleaning process about 5 or 6 times.
Yeah, we did. We do it pretty regularly.
And so Mrs. Martini was a part of this process at least 5 or 6 times.
Yeah, he was.
And Mr. Francasio, at your winery, you store your pesticides far away from your wine and your grapes. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's the industry standards to do so.
And Mrs. Martini knows that this is the standard.
Yeah, he does. I taught him everything he knows.
And you have to take a course to get a liquor license in Midlands, right?
Yeah, I think that's pretty standard everywhere across this country. It's not really like Italy back home.
And in this course, it's true that they taught you about this pesticide law.
Yeah, of course. Everyone knows about the pesticide safety. They really hammer that part in.
Now, I'd like to talk to you about the emails that you referenced earlier. Ms. Martini sent you an email in around October about some pest problems that she was having.
Yeah, I believe it was around October was when I got the first email.
And would you recognize this email if I showed it to you?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, permission to show or to screen share Exhibit 14.
All right.
Can you see the document, Mr. Francasio?
Yes, I see it.
Does this look like a fair and accurate copy?
Yeah, it looks like, yeah, that looks right.
Your Honor, at this time, we would like to enter Exhibit 14 into evidence, constructively redacting the statements of Danny Francasio.
And the statements by Danny Francasio are located at the bottom of the document?
No, Francasio's email is at the top. The bottom is the email from Harper Martini.
Okay, all right. Any objection?
With that constructive redaction, no, Your Honor.
All right, it's admitted.
Now, in this email, Harper is talking about, is talking about that there are a lot of pests in her cellar.
Yeah, she said that he had a problem, my apologies, and he just needed some help getting the pests out.
Right, and in this email, Harper is saying, or Miss Martini is saying that they don't know how to get the cellar cleaned up.
Yeah, he was just asking me for my advice. What's the best way to clean the cellar? How did I do it?
Now, I'd like to move on to a different email that you received in May, shortly before the wedding of Casey and Genesis.
Okay.
Now, would you recognize emails from those dates if I showed them to you?
Yeah, I would.
Your Honor, permission to show Exhibit 20 or screen share Exhibit 17.
Okay.
And can you see these exhibits?
Oh, yeah, I can see it.
Now, it looks like a fair and accurate copy?
Oh, yeah, it looks all right. Looks good.
At this time, we would like to enter Exhibit 17 into evidence, constructively redacting Danny Francasio's statements in these exhibits.
Any objection from the defense?
Your Honor, pursuant to Rule 106, the rule of completeness, I would actually ask that Mr. Francasio's statements not be redacted. However, to the portions that counsel is asking be admitted, I have no objection.
How are this witness's statements necessary to meet the standard under Rule 106?
Your Honor, as you'll believe and as you'll see, and as I believe opposing counsel is going to show, this is a chain of emails, a conversation in which questions are asked and answered, and Mr. Francasio's responses contextualize Harper Martini's statements.
Is there a hearsay objection, a hearsay exception that would apply to Danny's statements?
Yes, Your Honor. There's a number of statements here. I don't believe that there's one exception that covers the entire document. However, a number would, I believe, fall under Rule 8033 is an existing plan as Mr. Francasio lays out a course of action.
All right. Ms. Trahan, do you have any objection to these statements from Danny coming into evidence?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Well, then it's admitted without being redacted.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, Mr. Francasio, I'll start at the bottom since that's where it begins. Ms. Martini talked about how Peony Estates had failed an FDA inspection. Is that correct?
That's right. And when I heard that, I was honestly pretty giddy about it.
And Ms. Martini goes on to talk about how they had some kind of drainage problem.
Yeah, he said he had a drainage problem, so I recommended it. A really nice organic drain cleaner from Italy. It's what I use, and I've never had any problems with my drains.
And that there was some kind of problem with the pesticide storage.
Yeah.
And they were storing their pesticides too close to where their wine was.
Yeah, so I recommended that he move the pesticides a bit further, follow the standards. It'd be all right. He said he would. He said he had a plan. He would move them further away. Took his word for it.
And it's illegal to keep these pesticides too close to the wine. Is that correct?
Yeah. That's why he said he was going to move them away from the winery.
And in these emails, you gave him advice to halt all shipping of the orders and to give a deep cleaning of the area. Is that correct?
Yeah, just give it a good once over. Make sure everything's looking real spotless. You don't want anything lingering around. Could future contaminate your products. He said he would do so.
But you have no idea if he did any of this, do you?
I mean, the guy could have been lying, but he said he did it.
But to your knowledge, you have no idea if he took any of your advice.
No, I mean, he could have just threw it to the wind, I guess, but I would hope he took my advice. He was my employee. I think he liked to, look up to me a bit.
Thank you. No further questions.
Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Francasio, if canisters of pesticides are stored close to a sealed bottle of wine, can one assume that the pesticides would make it into that sealed bottle of wine merely by their proximity?
No.
Objection outside the scope of my cross.
May I respond?
All right.
Your Honor, counsel asked Mr. Francasio about the email chain, which we just saw, I believe Exhibit 17, in which he discussed with Mr. Martini about how close pesticides were stored to the wine area and a plan to move those pesticides further away from the wine area. That distance between the two was subject to counsel's cross, and their claim today is that that distance would result in the wine being contaminated. I believe this sufficiently falls within the scope of counsel's cross pursuant to Rule 611.
All right, I'll allow it. Overruled.
Mr. Francasio, can we assume that a sealed canister of pesticide too close to a sealed bottle of wine would somehow make the pesticides enter the wine?
No, it's not just going to magically jump from the canister to the bottle. If it's sealed, you really shouldn't have to worry about it. But, I wouldn't keep my pesticides too close to my winery.
Thank you, sir. Nothing further.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Francasio. You may step down.
Thank you.
Any further evidence from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Austin Lewis.
All right, Mr. or Ms. Lewis, please come forward and assume you've been sworn.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me all right?
Can hear you just fine. Thank you very much.
Wonderful.
May I proceed?
Please do.
Good afternoon. Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
I sure could. My name is Louis Francasio. Sorry, my apologies. My name is Austin Lewis.
What do you do for a living?
I am a chief winemaker. In the viticulture industry, that's what we call a vintner.
What do you mean by chief winemaker?
You see, I work at Peony Estates, but my job is not really to plant or to grab the grapes or mash them. Really, I oversee the people that do that, my employees.
How long have you been working there?
I started working there in 2015. Back then, I actually used to work for Danny Francasio, but then I worked with Harper Martini once she decided to establish her own winery.
What are some of your responsibilities as the head winemaker specifically?
So, like I said before, I oversee the planting, the harvesting, the mashing, the bottling, and the aging of the wine. And a lot of people ask me, Louis, how do you have time for all of that yourself? But really, I'm just a good winemaker.
Now, does that growing process include using any pesticides?
Yeah, of course it does. We do use pesticides at Peony Estates. We use a pesticide called Bug Off.
How long has the winery been using that chemical?
We started using it in October of 2015. Oh, wow, I can't believe it's October already. So 5 years now. We've been using it for 5 years.
Could you explain specifically when that chemical is being used during the process?
Absolutely. There are two ways in which we use it. One, we use it for crops. We spray it directly onto the crops when there are infestations or insects that might be eating the grapes. And then we also use it in buildings. If we see insects in a building, we'll spray it.
All right, let's take those one at a time then. First, when you're spraying crops, are there any standards your winery has to follow?
Absolutely. There are FDA standards. We have to use a specific amount set by a range by the FDA.
Has the winery ever been in violation of spraying too many pesticides?
Nope, we have never been.
All right, so let's talk about storage facilities. Is there anything different?
Yeah, very actually. When we use it to spray a facility, we will have to remove every object or any equipment from the building. Now, if it can't be removed, we seal it. Then we bring in the pesticide, we spray the room, and we let it rest for about 48 hours until we can move everything back in.
Has the winery ever been in violation when spraying indoors?
We have, but it was for the storing of the pesticides and the distance.
What happened, Mr. Lewis?
So in May of 2019, we were ready to spray one of the buildings. And just before we were about to move the bottles out, one of our employees got ahead of himself and he moved the bottles or the canisters of pesticide into the building right before we moved the bottles out. Now, we didn't spray anything. We didn't even open the canisters. But right at that moment, Inspector O'Keefe showed up. And the canisters of pesticides in the bottle of wine were not supposed to be that close in distance, so we did get a citation.
Was the winery shut down?
No, absolutely not. That was a minor infraction. We were simply given a 45-day probation period.
What's probation?
It just means that during a specific period of time, like I said, for this time, 45 days, we had to fix whatever we got cited for. In that case, since it was only such a small minute, we fixed it immediately. And then during the rest of that period of time, those 45 days, Inspector O'Keefe was going to come again and inspect us.
Did you follow those instructions then?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We fixed them immediately.
Now, Mr. Lewis, according to you, you've been able to pass those inspections, but I want to discuss what happened to Genesis Petrillo, all right?
Yeah, sure.
Are you familiar with Genesis?
Yes, I am.
Do you know if Genesis ever drank wine from Peony Estates?
I do. I do know that she drank a bottle of Cara wine. It was a blend that we had prepared earlier in the year.
Are you aware of any pesticides being in that wine?
Not in the wine.
Proper expert opinion may be heard.
All right.
This witness lacks the proper education, experience, and training to make a conclusion about whether or not there was pesticide inside that 2019 bottle of Cara wine. By him making a claim as to whether or not there was or was not pesticide in this Cara wine bottle, he would be going outside of his expertise as the head winemaker of Peony Estates, as he lacks any sort of chemistry degree or any sort of experience in evaluating pesticides in wines. This is outside of his expertise.
Any response?
Yes, Your Honor. In this testimony, 701 does not apply because I'm not asking Mr. Lewis to give an expert opinion. I'm just asking, to the best of his knowledge, as the head winemaker, if the bottle of wine or any of their wine contained pesticides. That is just asking the best of his knowledge as a lay witness and is not an expert opinion under 701 or 702.
Sustained.
Now, Mr. Lewis, you were describing pesticide usage at your winery. Are you familiar with any lab reports on those wine?
I am. I know that there was a lab test ran on a bottle that the Cara wine was in.
Would you recognize a copy of that lab report if I showed it to you?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, at this time, my co-counsel, Ms. Gronick, should be screen sharing a copy of what's already entered as Exhibit 10. Let me know if you see it.
Okay.
Mr. Lewis, do you recognize this?
Yes, I do. It's the lab report that was ran on the bottle.
Is that a fair and accurate copy?
Yes, it is.
Sir, from what you're able to see in this lab report, frankly, doesn't this show there were pesticides in the bottle of Cara?
It does. But that doesn't mean that there were pesticides in the wine.
From everything you know, were there pesticides in the bottle before Genesis drank it?
Again, Your Honor, pursuant to your prior ruling, this is a violation of Rule 702, this testimony. Motion to strike?
Wow.
Mr. Lewis, could you explain what you said earlier about why this doesn't mean there are pesticides in the bottle?
Again, Your Honor, this.
Sustained.
Now, Mr. Lewis, do you know where that bottle of wine was found?
Yes, I do. I know that the bottle was found in a dumpster, and I know that it was empty. I know that pesticides were found in the bottle. The test that was ran on this, it was ran simply on the bottle, not the wine. And I know that the dumpster that it was found in, it's the same exact dumpster where we dispose of our pesticides.
Thank you, sir. No further questions at this time.
Okay. Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. May I ask opposing counsel leave up Exhibit 10? And may I proceed with cross-examination?
You may, yeah.
You can pay attention to the bottom of Exhibit 10, and please read along silently as I read aloud the additional notes by client section. It states that the sample collected was from the inside of the bottle of Cara wine, correct?
I'm sorry, could you repeat what statement you're referring to again? Is it the one right under additional notes by client?
Exactly. It says the sample collected on June 9th, 2019 was from the inside of an empty bottle of Cara wine, correct?
Yeah, you're right. It was an empty bottle of Cara wine, meaning that there was no wine in it.
This wasn't from the outside of the bottle though, correct?
You're right. It was an empty bottle of Cara wine.
May I ask opposing counsel to please remove the exhibit? Now, I'd like to talk about Peony Estates' use of chemical pesticides. Peony Estates had a lot of pests, didn't it?
Yes, not any more than the average winery.
And you tried to use organic methods to get rid of the pests, didn't you?
Well, I wanted to stay with an organic winery. I thought it was a really good selling label. I mean, nowadays, you slap organic on any product and millennials will buy it.
But organic methods were too costly, weren't they?
They were.
And so you used chemical pesticides instead.
Yes, we did.
But you vigorously opposed this, didn't you?
I did. I really thought it was a good selling point to stand out in Midlands.
Well, you were concerned it would lead to an unsafe level of pesticide, correct?
Yeah, with the crops. So as a result, we ended up having to screen the grapes at the bottom of the hill.
Now, I'd like to talk about the way you stored this pesticide. You mentioned on direct you started using pesticide in October of 2015, about 5 years ago.
Yep, that's right.
And you trained your employees on how to store the pesticide, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, every year I hold an annual training regarding everything that has to do with pesticide.
But just 1 month after your first training, you got a health code violation, correct?
We did.
This was for improperly storing pesticides.
Yeah, again, the storage was too far away.
And in July of 2018, you had another health code violation, didn't you?
Yeah, again, these were all minor. So there was no damage done after this. So really all I did was end up building a new shed.
Well, again, this was a health code violation, not a minor health code violation, right?
No, it was a minor health violation. We were not shut down.
Well, this wasn't, excuse me, in May of 2018, you had yet another issue, correct?
Yeah, again, we were not shut down.
It was because you moved pesticides into the wine production area, true?
Yep.
You mentioned on direct that you did this, that the FDA standards dictate sealing all the equipment off, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
So you saran wrapped the equipment on the wine production bottling process, true?
Yeah, we did. Anything that couldn't be removed, we sealed it.
But the FDA standards don't let you seal off active wine, do they?
No, I mean, any active wine is already in a cask, so those casks are moved out.
Because a seal doesn't necessarily protect against pesticides, does it?
I mean, really, it's redundant. Once you have the wine in a cask, the cask is already sealed. That's how the wine is able to ferment because of a lack of oxygen that is not able to get into the wine.
Are you saying FDA standards let you spray pesticide on a cask because of the amazing seal?
No, they do not. It has to be. They have to be removed.
All right, was there an objection?
Yes, Your Honor, just a compound question. I would ask opposing counsel break up those questions.
Okay, rephrase your question.
Yes, Your Honor. Are you saying that pesticide chemicals are allowed to be sprayed directly on a cask pursuant to FDA standards?
No, that is definitely not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that we move the casks out of the building.
The FDA standards require you to do that in case pesticides contaminate it, correct?
They do.
But in May of 2018, you didn't do this, did you?
We moved everything out of the building. We moved the casks out of the building. We did.
You didn't move the wine bottles out of the building, did you?
The bottles, no. So the bottles, we didn't move them when we didn't move them before we sprayed. The casks, we did.
Okay, well, it's a violation to bring pesticide into to bring pesticide into the bottling area, correct?
When the equipment is in there, yes, that's why we got the citation.
And you committed a health code violation in May of 2019.
Yep, that's why we got a probation period.
And after this health code violation, you were supposed to retrain your employees?
Not supposed to. I wanted to.
You were required to.
I wanted to do a re-instruction. I wasn't able to, but I ended up putting signs, and I ended up just reminding them that they had to follow the procedure.
You wrote a statement prior to today's case, right?
Yes, I do. Yes, I did.
You'd be familiar with that statement?
Yes, I would.
And is it your sworn testimony in that statement that the FDA inspector did not require you to do this?
I thought it would be helpful to do so, but we weren't required to.
Well, specifically, Harper Martini forbade you to, correct?
Yeah, she thought it would be a waste of time to do my 2-day annual training.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Okay, redirect.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Lewis, just a couple moments ago, you were talking about having casks in the bottling room with pesticides. To be clear, did you ever spray the bottling area with wine in that area?
No, absolutely not. That would be a serious violation. That would actually be dangerous. When the canisters were moved into the building, they were sealed. And I know that they weren't supposed to be that close, but there was no damage.
Thank you, sir. No further questions at this time.
Okay, the witness may step down. Does the defense have any further evidence?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Dr. Richard Cannon.
All right, Dr. Cannon, please come forward and assume that you have been sworn.
May I proceed?
Do we have our witness?
Yes.
I'm not seeing anybody.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
There he is.
Right now.
Okay, got it.
May I proceed?
Please do.
Please introduce yourself to the court.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Richard Cannon.
What kind of doctor are you?
I specialize in toxicology and pharmacology, which in short just means that I study the way that toxins and other harmful substances interact with the human body.
Where'd you go to school to become a toxicologist and a pharmacologist?
I graduated from Harvard Medical School, summa cum laude, back in '96 with my medical degree with an emphasis in toxicology. Following that, I worked for Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston for almost a decade. I served as their chief toxicologist there. I then returned to academia and taught toxicology classes at Midlands Medical School. And ever since that time, I've worked in private practice as a consultant in legal cases where medical expertise may be useful.
Dr. Cannon, how did you get involved with today's case?
I was contacted on April 2nd of this year by Ms. Martini's attorneys to assess the connection that there may or may not be between a bottle of wine and a death of a Mr. Genesis Petrillo.
What information did you have to review, doctor?
I was provided with the same evidence that the attending physician, Dr. Kwan, was provided. This included test results, medical records, an account of the night, a number of exhibits, and an affidavit of one Angel Rodriguez. This was sufficient information for my analysis.
How did you use this information in that analysis?
My analysis consists of a simple review of the medical facts of the case compared to the analysis of the case as done by the attending physician. It's one of the most common practices in my field. I taught it when I was a teacher. As far as I'm aware, it's still taught, and I was able to reliably apply it to this case.
So, doctor, what did you discover during your analysis?
My analysis showed that we just don't know what happened in this case. There's a number of competing theories that all cause some doubt as to what really happened due to overlapping symptoms. We can't say that any one cause is more likely than not. While the most likely of these unlikely options may be pesticide poisoning, there's still too many issues with that theory to rule out the others.
What are some of the issues with that theory?
Well, one of the biggest issues with the theory of pesticide poisoning is that a number of the symptoms that are experienced during a pesticide poisoning are also consistent with alcohol poisoning.
Why can't we rule out the possibility of alcohol poisoning?
Like I said, there's a number of overlapping factors. And we know in this case, when Mr. Petrillo was first admitted to the emergency room, Dr. Kwan was of the belief that he was experiencing alcohol poisoning based on the symptoms. These include vomiting, nausea, incontinence, slurred speech, difficulty walking, among others. Additionally, the overall cause of death, respiratory failure, is consistent with a death by alcohol poisoning.
Would alcohol poisoning explain all of the symptoms that Mr. Petrillo had?
No, they would not explain all of the symptoms, which is part of the issue. There's a number of competing theories that cause some murkiness here. There's a lot of similarities between alcohol poisoning and organophosphate poisoning, and so we just can't say with any medical likelihood what happened, and that's in no small part due to the lack of evidence collected by Dr. Kwan.
What evidence was lacking?
Well, specifically, when Mr. Petrillo was admitted to the emergency room, it took Dr. Kwan almost 2 hours to measure his BAC, his blood alcohol level. And that's a decision I don't understand, given Dr. Kwan's belief that Genesis was suffering from alcohol poisoning when first admitted. Knowing what the BAC was at its peak point would be essential to either proving or disproving a case of alcohol poisoning.
Dr. Kwan, why does that Dr. Cannon, why does that 2 hour delay on testing BAC matter?
Like I said, peak BAC is essential in an alcohol poisoning case because it's peak BAC that really determines how much damage the brain suffers and the central nervous system may experience. By waiting 2 hours, Mr. Petrillo's body had almost 120 minutes of uninterrupted processing, possibly more on the alcohol, which brought it down from its peak level. And because it wasn't measured earlier, we aren't able to say with any medical likelihood how high it could have been as a certain number.
Dr. Cannon, is there a formula that's universally used to calculate peak BAC?
No, ma'am, science hasn't gotten to that point. I don't know if it ever can. There's a number of individual factors in every case, such as the size of the individual, the content of their stomachs, the capability of their liver, their metabolic rate, to really to say that with any degree of certainty. To come to a number of to give a number of decline in a BAC level is simply medically impossible.
How high of a BAC does one have to have in order to exhibit the symptoms that we know Mr. Petrillo had?
Well, in reviewing the information in this case, I was given a chart provided by Dr. Kwan. If we could bring that up on screen, I think that would be useful in explaining the issue.
Your Honor, permission for my co-counsel to screen share Exhibit 23.
Okay.
Dr. Cannon, let me know when you can see it all right.
Yes, ma'am. Just waiting on that. Okay, I can see that on screen.
Now, Dr. Cannon, earlier you mentioned some of Mr. Petrillo's symptoms. Where do those symptoms fall on this chart?
Yes, one moment, please. I'm going to activate the annotate function on this so I can mark it up a little easier, just for the better understanding of the court. So if we look here at this orange level, the 0.26 to 0.35 level of severe impairment, this is where we start to see symptoms outside of the range that were measured at 0.16.
Your Honor, I just asked that defense move to enter this exhibit into evidence before Dr. Cannon assesses it.
Your Honor, the defense offers Exhibit 23 into evidence, noting for the court that it will be used for demonstrative purposes and will be edited and marked up.
All right, any objection to it being admitted?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, it's admitted.
Dr. Cannon, please continue.
As I was saying, there's a number of symptoms in this 0.26 to 0.35 category, severe impairment, that we know Genesis was experiencing. These include severe coordination impairment, inability to walk or stand, vomiting, incontinence. I put a check mark next to each of these.
Dr. Cannon, did any of Mr. Petrillo's symptoms fall in the life-threatening impairment category?
Yes, ma'am, they did. That's this red section at the bottom, 0.35 to 0.5 BAC. Here we see unconsciousness. We know that Mr. Petrillo fell unconscious shortly before 911 was called. We know that Mr. Petrillo fell into a coma, and we know that he eventually died due to respiratory paralysis. These are all consistent with life-threatening impairment levels of BAC, and I place a check mark next to each of them.
Thank you, Dr. Cannon. Mr. Metz, you can go ahead and take that down. So, Doctor, what does this chart tell us about Genesis Petrillo's potential peak BAC that night?
Well, what it tells us is that while we lack an affirmative evidence or an affirmative scientific basis in the form of a test, which would have been conducted by Dr. Kwan, to say with certainty what Mr. Petrillo's peak BAC could have been that night, what we can say is that the known facts that Mr. Petrillo experienced are consistent with meaningfully higher levels of BAC, ones that are potentially lethal.
Thank you, Doctor. I have nothing further.
All right, cross-examination,
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
please do.
Dr. Cannon, are you ready to proceed?
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Cannon, you conclude in this case that there are many diagnoses that cannot be ruled out.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
I want to talk with you about one of those diagnoses that you mentioned, alcohol poisoning.
Yes, ma'am.
You'll agree with me that alcohol poisoning does not explain the pesticides found in Mr. Petrillo's system.
No, ma'am. Like I said, there's a number of overlapping symptoms, but neither theory fully explains everything.
And like you said on direct, Mr. Petrillo's blood alcohol content tested at 0.16%. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, 0.16, 2 hours after admittance.
And you believe that alcohol poisoning could have resulted in Mr. Petrillo's death?
Yes, ma'am, the symptoms he experienced as reported by Dr. Kwan are consistent with that.
But Dr. Cannon, I want to be clear, you have never seen a case where someone has died with less than a 0.30 blood alcohol content.
A peak blood alcohol content of 0.3, that's correct, ma'am, although Dr. Kwan did note in her report that she's seen it as low as 0.25 or 0.23.
So for this to align with any death case that you've seen, Mr. Petrillo's blood alcohol content would have had to been at least 0.30 at its peak.
At its peak, yes, ma'am.
And Dr. Cannon, you have no evidence that Mr. Petrillo's peak BAC was 0.3. Is that correct?
That's incorrect, ma'am. As I went through on my direct examination, there were a number of symptoms that are consistent with considerably higher levels of peak BAC. However, we have no affirmative evidence as in the form of a test to prove that conclusively.
Is that a yes to my question? You have no affirmative evidence that Mr. Petrillo's BAC was 0.3?
Yes, ma'am, no affirmative evidence due to a lack of test.
Additionally, you would agree with me that alcohol poisoning doesn't explain Mr. Petrillo's low acetylcholinesterase levels.
No, ma'am.
Alcohol poisoning doesn't explain Mr. Petrillo's watery eyes.
No, but shining a bright light into them would.
Alcohol poisoning doesn't explain Mr. Petrillo's contracted pupils.
Actually, that can happen in an alcohol poisoning case. It's not necessarily typical, but not unheard of.
But actually, in most alcohol poisoning cases, the pupils are actually dilated, aren't they?
That's correct, ma'am. As I said, it's not typical, but not unheard of.
There is no affirmative evidence that would support a conclusion that Mr. Petrillo's blood alcohol content was at least 0.30% or even close to approach that number.
No, ma'am, no affirmative evidence, as I said, because there is no test, but there is coincidental evidence that indicates toward it.
And you cannot deny Dr. Kwan's conclusion.
Yes, ma'am, I can. I do deny the conclusion that it's most likely on an absolute scale pesticide poisoning.
Well, Dr. Cannon, you state that pesticide poisoning is actually the most likely cause of Petrillo's respiratory arrest. Isn't that right?
Ma'am, you're confusing my conclusion and Dr. Kwan's. Dr. Kwan's conclusion is stated on an absolute, which I disagree with. I believe that the issues of this case are too medically uncertain to say with medical likelihood. On the differential of the number of things we can look at, yes, organophosphate does appear most likely, but that's out of a number of unlikely options.
In fact, you believe that the facts are consistent with Petrillo's death being caused by consuming wine that contained pesticides.
Absolutely, ma'am. It is consistent with that and also consistent with alcohol poisoning, which is why this is a confusing case, and I don't think we can have medical likelihood.
Thank you, Dr. Cannon. Your Honor, I have no further questions.
Okay, any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
All right, the witness may step down. Any further evidence from the defense?
No, Your Honor. At this point, the defense rests its case in chief and requests a brief recess before we move into closing statements.
Okay, all right. For the plaintiff, do you have anything to bring up before we break?
No, Your Honor, the plaintiff is ready to proceed to closing arguments, but we would be fine with a brief break.
Okay, all right. Let's keep it brief and no more than 5 minutes. Okay, guys? Thanks.
Your Honor, the plaintiff is all returned and is ready to proceed whenever the defense is.
Okay, thank you.
We're ready to proceed as well, Your Honor.
Okay. All right. Does anybody need any check of time?
No, Your Honor. I believe
Okay.
I'm all set.
All right. Then the jury is with the plaintiff. We'll hear from you. Oh, wait, I should ask. Is the plaintiff going to open and close? Or just offer one closing?
Yes, Your Honor, I would like to reserve any of my remaining time for rebuttal.
Okay, all right. Then the jury is with the defense.
I just kept thinking about Peony Estates. That is what Casey Soto was thinking when she found the love of her life had died the night before her wedding. Genesis Petrillo should still be here today. And if the defendant had done what was required of them, he still would be. But that's not what happened. The defendant prioritized their profits over the basic safety of their own employees and customers. You heard how Peony Estates neglected the advice of Inspector Adkins O'Keefe time and time again. And the sad thing is, Peony Estates knew the basic safety protocol, and they chose to neglect it. That is why we have brought forth a claim of negligence per se against Peony Estates today. We had the burden of proof in today's case. We had to prove negligence per se by a preponderance of the evidence, or more likely than not. Members of the jury, we've not only met that burden, we've exceeded it. To prove negligence per se, we had to prove 4 elements to you today. First, that the statute in question, Midlands Section 12100, was a safety statute. The defense already agreed to that prior to trial today. Second, we had to prove that Genesis Petrillo was a part of the statute's protected class. The defense already agreed to that before trial today as well. The only 2 elements we had to prove to you today were 1, that Peony Estates violated the health statute by failing to properly restrict and store pesticides. And 2, that Peony Estates violation resulted in a harm against Genesis Petrillo. And that was Genesis Petrillo's death as a result of pesticide poisoning. Let's go through those 2 elements one by one. How did Peony Estates violate the Midland statute? You heard Inspector Adkins O'Keefe testify that she inspected Peony Estates 3 times from 2018 to 2019, right up to Genesis and Casey's wedding. When Inspector Adkins O'Keefe came in May 2019, Peony Estates had 4 health code violations, 3 of them relating to pesticides. One of those violations, that some wine was too close to some pesticides. The bottle was a 2019 Cara wine bottle, the same wine that killed Genesis Petrillo. Inspector Adkins O'Keefe told Peony Estates to immediately discard this wine because it was just too dangerous. You may be asking yourself, why would the defendant do this? Why not implement these changes? Profits. You heard Casey Soto testify that her and Genesis were so concerned about pesticides that they thought about moving their wedding venue to somewhere else. The Peony Estates wouldn't let them. You heard Austin Lewis say again and again that health code violations that could threaten their customers' lives were minor. And because of this, you know that they violated the statute. That element is proven. So what came of Peony Estates ignoring these basic rules for sake of profit? Genesis Petrillo paid the ultimate price and died of wine that contained pesticides. Dr. Kwan told you that there was nothing else found in Genesis Petrillo besides wine and pesticides. All of the symptoms and all of the tests that Dr. Kwan ran made it crystal clear that Genesis Petrillo was poisoned by a wine contaminated with pesticides. Now, Dr. Cannon tried to tell you today that Genesis Petrillo died of alcohol poisoning, but he admitted to you today that he agrees that the most likely cause of death is pesticide poisoning from the 2019 Cara wine. He admitted that the facts were consistent with pesticide poisoning. Why? Because that is what happened. Genesis Petrillo was a young man who was excited to marry his girlfriend of 3 years and filled with the excitement for the joy of life that was about to come. He opened up a wine bottle, which was the very thing that took it away. Peony Estates knowingly disregarded basic pesticide protocols in order to make a profit, and Genesis Petrillo paid the ultimate price. Don't let Peony Estates get away with something so careless and so despicable. Find the defendant liable for negligence. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Counselor. The jury's with the defense.
May it please the court, counsel, members of the jury. When a tragedy occurs, it's only natural to want somebody to blame. It's hard to stomach the idea that a young man could die on the morning of what was supposed to be the happiest day of his life, and that it could be the result of an accident, that it could be alcohol poisoning and not a pesticide-laced bottle of wine that took Genesis Petrillo away from his fiancée and his family. And so it's easier to have somebody to blame. But while it may not look like it at the present moment, members of the jury, this is still a court of law. And so we can't assign blame when the evidence doesn't support it. And when we examine the evidence that we've seen throughout this trial, we're left with these three key questions, the answers of which, just like my colleague, Ms. Lamerson, told you would be the case at the beginning of this trial, we still just don't know. What was Genesis Petrillo's peak blood alcohol content on June 8th, 2019? We asked every witness, the plaintiff's witnesses, our own, do you know what his peak BAC was? Do you know how much he had to drink? No one had an answer, so we still just don't know. How was that bottle of wine contaminated by pesticides? We asked every witness who was there that night. No one had an answer, so we just don't know. When was that bottle of wine contaminated by pesticides? Before he drank it, or in the dumpster with those pesticide canisters afterward? We asked every witness. No one had a definitive answer, so we just don't know. And the fact that the plaintiff couldn't answer these three key questions, well, members of the jury, quite frankly, that's a problem. Because the plaintiff came here today with a very particular burden. That's a burden that we, the defense, do not share. See, the plaintiff had to prove to you by a preponderance of the evidence, which means more likely than not, more likely than any alternative explanation, more likely than our explanation of alcohol poisoning, that Peony Estates is liable for negligence per se. And what that means is they had to prove to you the two elements of negligence per se that are still in contention today. First, they had to prove that Peony Estates violated the applicable section of the Midlands Building Code by failing to store their pesticides safely and failing to take precautions to prevent their wine from being contaminated by pesticides. And second, well, they had to prove to you that because of that alleged violation, Genesis Petrillo suffered harm. But the problem with the plaintiff's case is that because they couldn't answer those three key questions, they were not able to prove by a preponderance of the evidence those two elements. And here's what I mean by that. Let's take that first question. what was Genesis Petria's peak blood alcohol content. You see, if they couldn't prove incorrect the theory that he died because he had too much to drink that night, well, then members of the jury, they haven't proved that it was pesticide poisoning that killed him. They had to rule that out. But because Dr. Kwan, their expert, waited over 2 hours to test Mr. Petrio's blood alcohol content, we simply don't know what the peak BAC was. And Dr. Cannon told us that because we don't know what that peak BAC was, and because Genesis Petrio was exhibiting 7 different symptoms that suggested it was far higher than 0.16, 3 of those symptoms, which put him in the lethal range for alcohol poisoning, we can't rule that out. And it's plausible that he died of alcohol poisoning. Today, Dr. Kwan tried to invent a formula that could tell us that it couldn't have possibly reached that 0.25 threshold for a lethal level. But we looked at Dr. Kwan's report, and that formula wasn't in there. And Dr. Cannon was able to tell us that his field, both of these experts' fields, recognizes no such formula. And so they failed to answer this question, and they failed to prove that second element in contention today, which brings us back to the first. Because it wasn't enough for the plaintiff to prove that Mr. Petrio died of pesticide poisoning. You see, they had to prove that he died of pesticide poisoning because there were pesticides in that bottle of wine, because Peony Estates violated those health inspection standards. And they weren't able to do that because they weren't able to tell us how that bottle of wine was contaminated, if at all. And they weren't able to tell us when. Let's start with when. Austin Lewis told us that that bottle of wine, once empty, ended up in a dumpster, which also contained used canisters of pesticides. Now, because the plaintiff couldn't prove that the pesticides ended up on that bottle before Mr. Petrio drank it, and they couldn't prove that it didn't happen in the dumpster after he drank it, they couldn't answer when, they couldn't establish that nexus. Similarly, they weren't able to tell us how pesticides allegedly ended up in that wine before Mr. Petrio drank it. Because we heard from Mr. Francasio, you can't just assume that because sealed canisters of pesticides are too close to a sealed bottle of wine, that somehow the pesticides would make it from that canister into the wine. And through all of their witnesses, through all of their experts, the plaintiff wasn't able to tell us how it made that jump, if at all. They want you to believe, well, maybe it was when pesticides were sprayed inside. But we heard from Mr. Lewis, the day that Ms. Adkins O'Keefe cited them for having pesticides too close to the winery, they didn't even end up spraying. So if that didn't happen, the plaintiff failed to prove how. Because they couldn't answer the question of what Genesis Petrio's peak BAC was, and because they couldn't prove how and when, members of the jury, they failed to prove their case. They failed to meet that preponderance threshold because there are so many questions, the answers of which we just don't know. I would challenge Miss Daly when she comes before you again in a few moments to answer these questions, but she can't. And so you cannot find Peony Estates liable for negligence. Thank you.
Okay, rebuttal,
Yes, Your Honor, may I proceed?
please.
Members of the jury, I'll remind you of the answers to Ms. Grenick's questions that we highlighted again and again through trial today. We do know that there is no evidence Mr. Petrillo's blood alcohol content was anywhere near the 0.30% that was at least needed for it to be fatal. And Dr. Cannon, the defense's own witness, admitted that today. We do know that Peony Estates suffered 3 pesticide violations. That is not a coincidence. We know Peony Estates didn't care. Austin Lewis called 4 health code violations minor. Inspector Adkins O'Keefe always had an issue with their pesticide storage, and it was never fixed. The only person who could say it was fixed right before the wedding was Austin Lewis, whose entire livelihood is riding on this. We do know that the Cara wine was tested and had pesticides present. We know that pesticides were found in Mr. Petrillo's stomach. We know Mr. Petrillo died from pesticide poisoning at the hands of Peony Estates. Find them liable. Thank you.
Okay, great job, everybody. Take a deep breath. All right, I think at this point, the judges, should I ask, is there anything further from any of the parties?
Nothing further from the plaintiff.
Okay, good. All right, we need to handle our tabulation, and then I'll come back and give some comments, okay? All right, so don't go anywhere. All right. Yeah, why didn't everybody just turn on your cameras so we can all kind of see each other here? I don't know if Andrew, the other judge, is he still here? Maybe working on his scores. There he is. Nice headset. Okay, so let me introduce myself. My name is Don Pocock. I'm an attorney at the firm called Nelson, Mullins, Riley, and Scarborough, and I practice in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. My practice is complex civil litigation cases all across state and federal courts. I also teach trial practice at Wake Forest, although I'm not teaching right now, and have some involvement with the trial teams at the law school at Wake Forest. The fact that you guys are undergraduates and are doing as well as you are is really, really impressive. I just want to tell every single one of you, being a practitioner and having had to deal with a couple of depositions and hearings and things with remote means it is such a challenge. And for you to have pulled it off with the poise and skill that you did is really, really impressive. So I just was very, very, very impressed with the quality of everybody in this group, both witnesses and lawyers alike. I love the accents. I love the putting on some of the character. I thought that was really fun. The competition that I coach for at Wake Forest, we also bring our witnesses. So I got a couple of ideas that I'm going to steal from you guys. Thank you very much. One thing I wanted to just sort of note as well, dealing with expert witnesses is, in my view, really an advanced trial skill. And so for not having taken evidence and to be dealing with experts, you guys did a really, really good job. There seems to be maybe some confusion as to what constitutes an expert opinion, which I wouldn't hold against you because you haven't obviously studied this like a law student yet. But anytime you're asking somebody to make any kind of a conclusion, that's going to be an opinion. And so there were a couple of times where there were some objections to fact witnesses making a guess as to whether or not something was inside of a bottle or not inside of a bottle, even though that, that kind of thing is actually, you'd have to have some kind of training or experience or a method or a technique to be able to make that determination in this specific case. I mean, there were other examples as well, and I won't run through all of them, but I felt like that was something that that sort of tripped up both sides. That being said, I think that on the whole, everybody did a fantastic job. One of the things that I always look for is, do you know the difference between how to do questioning on direct versus cross? On direct, are you getting a witness able to open up and tell their story? Are you asking open-ended questions? Are you enabling the witness to be able to talk to the jury? That's what direct exam is really about. The flip is the case on cross. On cross, are you exhibiting control of the witness by using leading questions? Are you being able to ask really narrow, pointed questions that drive to a specific point? And I really felt like all of the lawyers today showed a good skill at being able to distinguish between those two things. The other thing that I think is difficult for a lot of students to get their head wrapped around is what's the difference between an opening and a closing? Because the tendency, particularly if you're law school minded, when you get into an opening, is to want to tell the jury why you should win. And you can so easily fall into what is an argument when you get there. So I was really looking to see, are the openings, are they giving sort of a prediction of what the facts are going to be? Are they going to introduce us to the different witnesses? Are they going to be able to give us some mileposts to watch for in the trial? And the openings did a good job of that. There may have been a little bit of argument in the defense open, but it wasn't terrible. The closings were all very, very good. I mean, good stories. I will say, from the defense's point of view, I mean, obviously the defense's case here is that there's not an adequate amount of proof that there was pesticide in the bottle that led to this guy's death. But what I would like to hear is, was there a theory of the defense's case as to what caused the death, and what would be the best facts to really present that? And what stuck out at me is the only thing in the guy's stomach was wine. Literally, the only thing in the guy's stomach was wine. And so, if the defense's theory is that he died of alcohol poisoning and not of pesticides, well, he didn't even have so much as a roll in his stomach. Like, there he was at his rehearsal dinner, not eating. And then from the plaintiff's point of view, I think, it's really, really difficult to be able to tie, was the pesticide actually inside of this bottle? Not generally was the wine exposed to the pesticide. And I think this is a hard plaintiff's case in that regard, to be able to demonstrate that the wine was itself tainted. But you guys, really fantastic job, especially under the circumstances. Andrew, do you have anything you want to add to the group?
Yeah, so I'm Andrew Patterson. I'm a 2L at Baylor Law School. I did undergrad mock trial for 4 years, and now I coach the undergrad team here at Baylor. I agree. I thought y'all did a really good job. This was a really good round. For me, kind of just like the two kind of like big overarching kind of like comments that I have for y'all. I think the first one is really pay attention to the presiding judge and, listen to what their rulings are and what they're saying. I thought there was quite a few times where there was a ruling and then almost the exact same question was asked, or, maybe a couple questions later, the same question is asked again. And you can't do that. You need to pay attention to what the judge is saying. If you're going to go back and try to lay some foundation to get those questions in, then that's okay. Good, do that. But if you're just gonna re-ask the question or try to get the witness to re-say the exact same thing by maybe changing one word in the question, that's not gonna do it, and it's gonna make it look like you're like either you don't agree with the judge or you're just not listening to them, which isn't what you want to convey. And then the other thing, I think. Just overall throughout each of the different witnesses, I think in general, you want to look at laying more foundation. I thought with the experts, there was definitely conclusions that that you're trying to make that it hadn't had the foundation laid, where either, you know, we haven't heard what kind of methods you're using or what sort of, you know, data you relied upon. You know, is that reliable? Do other people in your field do that? And I think even the lay witnesses were getting into that quite a bit too, where they were trying to make these conclusions or these opinions or say these fact statements that we hadn't had foundation for. And I think it's a pretty easy thing to resolve, where, you know, just ask a couple extra questions, you know, how, like, you know, for an expert, you know, what methods did you use to analyze this? What data did you rely upon? Or for the, you know, for the lay witnesses, you know, if you're trying to get out, you know, something about this bottle of wine, you know, had you ever seen that, you know, had you seen that bottle move? Had you seen, you know, this happen, or how do you know this? Kind of those kind of questions to get out how this witness has that personal knowledge in order for them to make that opinion. So I think just like working on that a little bit more, but otherwise I thought it was really good. I thought both sides definitely show that they know a good bit about the rules of evidence, especially for this is both y'all teams' first tournament, I'm guessing, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So like being this early in the season, y'all are at like a very good starting point for the beginning of the season. So I think you know, just spending a little bit more time with the rules of evidence, with your coaches, kind of developing some of those more foundational questions. I think y'all will be in a, you know, very good place moving forward.
Yeah, expert stuff is tricky, and it's tricky for people who are in practice. It's not just because you're a student that you find it difficult. It's hard for everybody because experts, a good expert examination has a couple of different phases to it. You know, the first phase of the exam has to introduce the witness, get them, you know, comfortable with the jury, and laying out their qualifications and their education and their experience, and making them sound like they're just the smartest person to walk on the face of the planet. And then while doing that, you get the witness to talk a little bit about how they do what they do and why it's reliable and why it's so well recognized in their field and how they are a preeminent scholar or authority or something like that in their field. And then what we would expect to see in state or federal court would be there would be a motion that the expert is proffered as an expert witness. And at that point in time, the trial court has to make a decision, acting as sort of a gatekeeper, whether or not this person meets the standard of being qualified. Do they know what they're talking about? Are they educated? Do they have the right kind of experience? Are the methods that they're using reliable? And there's an entire body of law out there on how trial courts go about making that determination. And then assuming that the trial court allows the expert to be proffered as an expert, I feel like at that point you have an opportunity to turn the expert into a kind of a teacher, right? Who gets to turn to the jury and tell the jury, gosh, everything you've ever wanted to know about accounting methods, or something that's very, very particularized like that, right? And they get to opine on things that, in giving an opinion that may not even be admissible, but because they're an expert, if it's something that they rely upon in their field, they get to talk about stuff like that. They're given a tremendous amount of leeway and privilege in that regard, and so you build towards the point towards the end of the examination of sort of a reveal of the opinion, that gets everybody to the conclusion, well, yeah, of course, that's what must have happened. And so there's this progression, if you will, in the presentation of the witness that sort of builds a bit of a suspense. And when you get to the end of it, you have the jury kind of nodding along, hopefully, with your witness and saying, yeah, that's exactly what happened. It's hard. It's not easy. And especially when you've got time constraints, it's very difficult. And you've got a lot of information to get through, and you've got only a short amount of time to do it. But everyone should feel very proud of the work that they did. I really thought that everyone did a great job. And I'm sure you all go on to fantastic careers, both in trial ad and in practice of law. I don't think that there's anyone coming back. Is that right, Andrew? I think we're just kind of breaking from here. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Well, best of luck to all of you in college, and as you look forward to law school, and keep working at it. You're doing great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.